Hello, beautiful people. It's been so long. It's Bella speaking to you from Miami, from my new place, from my new life. And it's been quite a while since I've made a video, and I have to tell you how much I missed interacting with all of you, connected to the energy field, and really sharing some of my insights and then receiving your feedback. That has been such an important part of my life for the last couple of years that I really felt a big void, and I promise I won't do this again. But it's just been a really tough time of transition for me. So I wanted to share precisely about this transition, but more so about, as an outsider, quote unquote, as someone that was living kind of off grid for a while, I wanted to share my thoughts about how I perceive, and I felt a really strong call to come back on the grid and be in a city and get more productive and work at a company, and it's something that I felt a call for, and at the same time, of course, it has been a shock. And so as someone who is going through that shock right now, or has gone through that, and with a child also who was raised in a completely, it's like natural way of being always in like waking up in the wilderness and walking through the puddles, and connecting to her ability to write songs, to going to a school 5 days a week, I wanted to share with you some of mine and her impressions, because I think it's important that every once in a while, and especially after the pandemic, where we've had a chance to really look at how we're living, to really evaluate whether all of this makes sense. Because it's like we go from generation to generation repeating some of the things, but we don't often consider, why are we doing this? For example, the educational system, the way it was created in the times of industrial times to create labor, and labor in a really negative sense of the word, because we needed people who don't think, don't ask questions, and who are sort of fulfilling the repetitive tasks. And because of that need, the educational system was created in a way that it's created. And despite the fact that we have moved from that era, and we need people to be much more creative, much more engaged with each other, so emotional intelligence is important, being more connected to yourself, to be more creative, we have maintained, most of the educational systems continue the same way that they are. So I think it's really important for us to critically look at all of those, normal ways that we go about doing things, to reconsider them, to maybe transform them in some way on an individual level, at a social level, at a policy level. It's time for us to look at things critically. We all have that responsibility, and we all can change things within our own environment. So I invite you to do that. So like I said, for the last 7 years, I've been living, I had the luxury of being able to be very connected to that feminine part of myself. So the creative part, the right side of the brain, and really flow with my body. And the same thing with my daughter. And it's no coincidence that she's 7, because when she was born is when I was called to connect to that part of myself. So as a woman, when you're producing life, you realize how incredible this nature's and our body's ability to create is. But it only works when you follow the natural rhythm of life. And through that call of becoming a mother, I was able to connect to the creativity in other aspects of my life. So for example, I created my first documentary, something that I had never done, participated in 2 festivals, and created something really meaningful for the rest of my life. I recorded my first album. I was able to set up 2 companies, one of which is still alive, a little bit on pause, but still alive, creating a new method. So all of these things were a result, not that all of a sudden I, became somehow more creative. It's because I was actually flowing with the way of nature, flowing with my body, and that allowed me to produce more things. So contrary to what most people think, I wasn't productive in a traditional sense. I was actually working much less. I was waking up, when my body allowed me to wake up with this natural rhythm. And the same thing for my daughter. And we would have a moment to connect to each other, to have a leisurely breakfast, and to go through the day in spurts of, this is the creative part, when we would be really creating something, and she would be writing a song and I would be putting together a new program or creating my video. And then we would have a break and we would go into nature and we would really engage, and then we would come back and continue creativity. Some days we would not create anything, and then some days we were much more creative and productive. Compare this to the way that our society is organized. So for her, especially, it was a huge shock, right? So the first 3 days of school were like, she would come back home crying, because all of a sudden she goes into this environment where they're sitting, just like, think about the process. There's someone giving you information. You have to absorb that information and spit it back at them, or whatever the form is. And for 7 hours straight, you're receiving information. You have to operate your mind at a very intense level, while your physical body is completely immobilized, pretty much. You're not allowed to move very much. You're not in contact with nature. You're enclosed in a cube of no direct sunlight, air-conditioned room, and you're not allowed to interact. I would ask her a couple of times, so are you making friends? She's like, I don't have time. We don't have time. And her lunch would come back, half full. And I was like, what happened? Well, we don't have enough time to eat, because I raised her to eat her food slowly and savor it. But within the 20 minutes, they're not able to, savor the food. So she ends up eating much less. So we had, in a sense, erased the limitations of time and space with her. And so going back into this, the society that values time and space above everything else is a big shock, because all of a sudden you have to ignore your body's natural rhythm. So for example, your productivity, you have to wake up slowly, allow your body to wake up, and you have to be most productive, let's say between like 11 and 2. That's where your productivity peaks, and then you have to slow down and maybe go have another peak later in the day. But we are expected to sort of have everything timed according to how in the industrial times the society decided was most productive. And this is not productive anymore. They can't just absorb all this information eternally. And guess what? Engaging the body together with the mind is extremely important. You can't just stimulate the mind and tell the kids to ignore their bodily needs, tell the kids to ignore their needs for social interaction. We disconnect from our bodies because we're told to sit for, from educational times on, right? So we have to sit for a certain amount of hours. And it's really tough for our bodies. So we end up disconnecting from our bodies. We're not supposed to feel, right? So the first day of school, my daughter was told that it's, you don't cry and you don't express your emotions here because this is not the place for doing so. And I immediately took her out of this place to a place where emotional intelligence was valued. Because again, we have to disconnect from our body, we have to disconnect from our emotions, and we have to only utilize our mind pretty much, right? For number of hours a day. Tell the kids to ignore their need for play. Guess what? She's still a child. Even though she's 7 and we expect that somehow magically at the age of 7 she should stop playing and now only focus on, education, play is an extremely important part of learning. That's how her brain develops. Play is proven to develop and connect our neurons in some of the most powerful ways. When we experience pleasure from play, both adult play and child play, produces the pleasure that we need, not only to make us feel good, but also to create these stronger connections in our brain and make us more creative, make us more productive. So the result of all of my creations, like I said, wasn't that I was pushing myself and forcing myself to do all these things. It was flowing out of me in such a natural way that it never even felt like work. So obviously we can't just erase the social rules and the way that we're working and the way that we are educating our kids completely. But I think it's important for us to consider that there might be better ways to learn. Rethink about what is it that we actually want the kids to learn, given how our society is structured. It's I don't remember, I was listening to this podcast and they were explaining how within the next 20 years we might not have formal jobs, so most of the jobs are going to be done away with, and only those that are entrepreneurial, creative can really survive, right? So what do we want? What kind of skills do we want to give our kids? We want to give them an ability to connect to this creativity. We want to give them the ability to be entrepreneurial. We want to give them the ability to engage with each other, to be cooperative. We want to give them the opportunity to connect different subject matters and have this interdisciplinary approach to solve all of the issues that we're facing that are no longer separated by subject, right? So that's the type of education that we need to really promote and create institutions that are like that. And thank God I'm in an institution that is promoting this type of education. Most of us continue living in this mental world, disconnected from who we are on a spiritual level and on a purely physical body level. We're disconnected. And it's no wonder that all the emotional and mental distress that we're seeing in our society, because this disconnect creates this constant, stimulation of the mind and zero stimulation for the body. Constantly having to be productive in the mind and underutilizing the body. So until we find a way, at work, at home, in our institutions, educational institutions, to connect the body and mind and to allow ourselves to break a little bit, these barriers and these space-time conundrums that we've created. Educate kids to be not just productive but happy and engaged, and to be looking at the way that our society is not working and correct that. And in order to do that, we really have to take a step back and not follow that script that we had created so long ago so blindly, and we have to rethink it individually, at a societal level, and at a policy level. So tell me and share what are some of the things that you think are very outdated, and maybe at your work or at your school things are being done differently. How and what do you think is actually helping us be more connected to our well-being, to our creativity, to creating kids that are more aligned with the way of life that we want to lead now, rather than forcing them to live in the past, and perpetuating the issues that we have been having as a society. So again, thank you so much for those of you that have missed me, and I hope you enjoyed my video. We will meet on a weekly basis here Please tell me what topics you would like to discuss, hear about, and I can't wait to see you next week.